Hello and welcome to another special holiday episode of the Rollin' 20s. I am Jeremy. Remember, you can subscribe to this show and several others in the MSP library at missionstarpodcast.com. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on iTunes and on Stitcher. Follow us on Twitter at the Rolling 20s. You can send us any fan mail, suggestions for the show, or hate mail at mspfreight@yahoo.com. The music you heard at the beginning of the show is by Machine Supremacy. You can find more of their discography for free download at machinesupremacy.com, as well as their latest couple of albums on amazon.com. This is yet another one of the panels I managed to host at the Great American Comic-Con in Las Vegas, Nevada this past December. And this guy challenged me quite a bit. And I don't say challenge in the fact that he tried to get me to arm wrestle or he suddenly, dared me to a sword fight in the middle of the panel. I just mean, to give you a little context, the host actually asked me, when you interview him, do you want him censored or uncensored? And I met him earlier in the con, and I told him I wanted him uncensored, not because I wanted to swear up a storm, and he did a little bit during the panel, so I'll warn you ahead of time. But I just wanted him uncensored because I want as much of his actual thought process as possible. This guy is a big, not exactly a huge creator when it comes to comics, but he is a personality. He's a very smart, well-read man, and he's created some characters that may end up in Marvel TV soon. He has a theory going on. It's rather interesting. Let alone, he also worked on the original Marvel Star Wars comics way back in the 70s and 80s. So this man's career is very, very notable. I want you guys to take a listen to this because it was a very rambunctious, energetic, and fun interview. This man's name is Howard Chaykin. Thank you very much. Enjoy, and we will see you in the new year.
All right. Take it away, Jeremy. I'm yours.
All right. I am Jeremy.
This is the biggest crowd we've had at the panel since I've been here. I'm very flattered. You guys have nothing better to do with your fucking lives. Please, take it away, Jeremy, one more time.
So
Back
much
to
trouble.
you.
I am Jeremy Wilson with Mission Star Podcast here at Great American Comic-Con with legendary creator Howard Chaykin. This man has worked on, oh my God, I'm blanking now, Dominic Fortune and American Flagg.
Among other things.
Yeah, among several other things. And you are definitely a person that speaks your mind. I'm definitely
and it has
in
not
trouble
served
here.
me well at all. I mean, it's made me one of the most despised people in the comic book business.
Seriously?
True. Yeah, I'm not a nice person. I'm kind of mean.
Really? Because I've seen
I'm very good, but I'm very not nice.
Well, I mean, I can't see how that makes you hate it. I mean, I've seen Chris Claremont panels. He definitely says what comes to
but
mind.
he had a stroke, so God obviously existed for that brief moment and took him down.
I am learning so much this weekend. Your career seems to be without a lot of like marquee companies or flagship titles. Do you avoid larger books to work on something that you can creatively control?
It's an interesting question. That's the first one you've asked so far, and the reality is this: I wrote I had to do a biography for a convention I went to some months back, and what started out as a 300-word thing turned into a 3,500-word thing, because it turned into a piece of self-exploration. And what I learned in writing this was that I am the architect of my own adversity. I created the career that I have. Because when I got into the comic book business, this is going to be a long answer to a short question.
It's okay.
When I got into the comic book business, I was the least talented and least naturally skilled of my generation. I had nothing going for me, but it didn't show it rage and hunger. And what ultimately happened was my skill set, what little there was, and there wasn't much, was really inappropriate for anything even vaguely smacking of commercial work.
Okay.
So I had to find other genres to work in. I was lucky enough that the sword and sorcery genre showed up, and then the science fiction shit showed up. By the time my skill set caught up with what could be commercial professional work, my interest in that professional commercial work had ceased to exist. Bear in mind that, I've been a comic book enthusiast since I was 4. I was given a refrigerator box filled with comic books when I was 4 years old. And it was all genre material, because in those days, when you read comics, you read everything.
When you say refrigerator box, you mean like one of those gigantic 8-foot boxes?
Yes. And I can still bring the sense memory of the smell of that paper today. There are certain triggers that bring that out. The way if you quit smoking cigarettes, you know that there are things you did when you smoked that when you do them again when you're not smoking, you bring back the resonance of that moment of that cigarette between your fingers. So I wanted to be a superhero comic book artist since I was aware of such a thing.
Okay.
Because I was at 4, I was able to identify the fact that this work just didn't happen. That it was made by someone, and the making of it was all I wanted out of life. So, but by the time I became professionally equipped to produce superhero comic books, I had lost my real interest in doing the kind of superhero comic books that were being done at the time.
Okay.
So, when you say not marquee product, I don't think I was ever professionally available to those things. I was not the go-to guy for that sort of thing when I came in the first place. And so I've been stuck doing ancillary work. I mean, it's one of the reasons why, I describe myself as the Robert Altman / Van Morrison, and now occasionally / Randy Newman of comic books. Because I do work that is, I'm better known to my colleagues than to the audience, and the enthusiasts don't really like me or my work because I'm not nice. And
it's okay. He's attacking.
Are you throwing yourself on a grenade or something? Okay. All right. Good.
Getting the Roku.
Or is there a fat blonde underneath the table that desperately needs attention?
Trying to get this Roku.
That fucking Roku.
Off here.
Can't even spell their own damn name.
It's driving me nuts.
So that's really where it's at. I mean, it's not like it was a conscious choice. Mm-hmm. But it was a direction created by a decision.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. You played to your strengths at the time.
Well, I had no strengths. I mean, I really didn't. I mean, you cannot understand the level of ineptitude that I brought to the table as a young cartoonist. I knew nothing. I had no point of view. I had no sense of what I was doing. All I had is that, as I say, was that hunger and rage. And it took 10 years of doing shaming work in public, and I mean shaming. And then going away and doing something else, having been driven out of the comic book business by the editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics, to do something else, and come back to comics, inexplicably receiving an offer from First Comics to do a new book for them. There's nothing in my CV, in that first 10 years of my career, that would indicate any reason to me why a startup company like First make me the offer they did to come in. And of course I'm forever grateful because it changed my life and my career. Doing American Flagg in 1983 was a transformative experience for me.
Okay.
And it made my persona in the comic book business, and it's the only other thing in the comic book business that when that Wednesday afternoon upper left-hand corner obituary in the New York Times runs with me, the headline will be Howard Chaykin, cartoonist, dies, fucked up Star Wars comics, also did American Flagg and did other shit too. That'll be it.
Okay. In researching your biography, you were said to have an ultra-violent style of comics. Do you think that's a distinction that's earned, or do you think that what you draw is fine? It was something that I cobbled together out of a couple different forum posts and eventually ended up on Wikipedia, which I know is about as informative as Garfield is.
Well, the thing about Wikipedia that pisses me off is it enables me no longer to lie about my age. It's just I have rage about this because at least I'm old, okay.
Okay.
And I used to be more fuckable looking even as recently as 5 years ago, and I was holding on to dear life to passing, like Pinky. No, I don't think so. I mean, I've done violent work. I mean, I think what it comes down to is that my first TV job was working for a bunch of guys. I did the Flash show and a bunch of other things for Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo. And I made an alarming discovery when I was working with those guys. They liked action. Mm-hmm. And I liked action and violence with consequences.
Okay.
And I really liked the idea of drawing stuff where people get hurt. And when I was a kid, Batman always would have these big fights with the Joker or the Penguin or some other shithead and stuff. Mm-hmm. And he'd have a Band-Aid on his arm, and Robin would help him, because Robin's a really good nurse. And when I did that third issue of American Flagg, where Ruben nearly beats John Scheisskopf to death, and Raoul talks him away from it, that was where I was at. I mean, I felt that was important. I'm a physical coward. I've been in fights since I was a little boy, but I kind of like violent films. I don't like horror films, but I share with my wife a passion for John Woo's real movies, the Hong Kong pictures.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
And I just saw Bone Tomahawk the day before I left for, have you seen it?
No, I need to catch up on that.
Fuck you up, man. It's great. It looked like it was made for nothing.
Yeah.
And it's so good.
Somebody made the mistake of showing me Hard Boiled and The Killers when I turned 12.
The greatest. I mean, those movies just, come on. A bullet in the head,
right. So I was the one who at 13, 14 was walking out of Schwarzenegger movies, and while the others were horrified and holding their eyes, I was laughing.
years ago, when Chaykin Fat and Jodie Foster did Anna and the King,
Yes.
we're driving home from San Francisco and we pit stopped in Carmel. And there used to be a movie theater in Carmel. And we stopped in the movie, we saw that, and we're sitting in the movie. And my wife, who was this beauty, tiny little blonde woman, turns to me halfway through the movie and says, if this piece of shit if Chaykin Fat doesn't start flying across the screen in slow motion with 2 guns and a bunch of doves, we're out of here. and I laughed at it. I thought that was fantastic. You know, I really did. I larfed, as they say in England.
That's when you know you got a good one.
Yeah, it was all right. No, she's a midget. It's okay. No, she's not a midget. You know, she's a tall midget.
I'm okay. It's okay. My wife's taller than me. Every time somebody
Really?
asks me, yeah.
That must be fun,
She's 5'10". Every time somebody asks me, what's it like being married to a tall woman? I just look at him and say, I like to climb.
My second wife was taller than I am.
Oh.
Yeah, but she had interior mouse issues. But please go
on. In regards to work on Star Wars, how did you feel about working on the Marvel Comics adaptation of this?
Adaptation. It's English is your first language. It's adaptation.
Okay.
You're dropping. At least get out of the like. It's not origin. It's origin. It's adaptation, not adaptation.
I'm half black, but I aced English. I'm okay.
Tall woman, huh?
Yes.
Good man.
Irish redhead too. You know.
Love it.
I have to know when to run.
Ah! All right. I did the breakdown of the screenplay.
Okay.
And I mean, I've told this story any number of times. People who've met me have heard this shit all over and over. I did the adaptation. I had 400 stills from the movie.
Wow.
Which all looked like IKEA.
Was that when they came out or after?
No. I got this material a year before the picture came out. I went to the original special effects studio was in Burbank. And I was there the day they were doing finishing touches on Darth Vader's flagship, which was hanging from the ceiling for the size of a refrigerator, made out of transistor radio parts and Tamiya tank model kits. And it was amazing. I was a modeler when I was a kid, never really ept, but okay, I liked it. And these guys were great modelers. It was a gas. I mean, there were 4 different scale versions of the Death Star, the trench, and shit like this, and the Millennium Falcon, all the old bullshit and stuff. And I walked out with 400 stills and the 17 or 18 McQuarrie paintings. And I'm working from the stills, and I had done 2.5 issues when the movie came out. I saw the movie 3 days before it came out at either the Loews State or the Loews Capitol, one of those massive movie palaces that are long gone in New York City now,
right,
which are now broken into multiplexes or prostitute cribs, depending on who you're talking to. And I'm sitting in the movie. There were 3 other people in the theater, and I'm saying to myself, "Holy fuck, this is going to be a big deal." And I realized at that point that had I known it was going to be that big a deal, I'd like to think I would have done a better job, because the work is awful. I mean, it's shamingly bad. It's hack work at best. It's the best I could have done at the time, but it isn't very good. And I also think there's a false assumption that the material lends itself to comic book adaptation.
You think maybe you were over-directed at that point?
No, not at all. No, I mean, one of the reasons that Roy liked working with me, I think, is that I was a pretty self-starting guy, and I had a pretty good understanding of narrative.
Okay.
You know, I think I'm a better writer than most comic book writers of my generation anyway, so sorry, guys. That's it for me. I started writing my own stuff out of self-defense because I realized that, you know, I was dependent less on cliche. And I was able to do a breakdown pretty well. And a lot of writers like working with me back in the 70s because I did most of their work for them. It took no money because I was an idiot. You know, so the Star Wars stuff, again, it's going to haunt me to my grave. And again, you cannot dispute the love people have I cannot dispute the love that people have for work that I know is dreadful.
Okay.
Because it's the confirmation of the success of the client in convincing the enthusiast that the material is the brand. It doesn't matter how badly made it is. It's material that makes the stuff, that gives the stuff its value, and I categorically disagree with that idea.
Okay.
Because even as a boy, you know, I recognized that there were guys whose work. I mean, what separated me from my fellow enthusiasts as a kid was that I knew that this was made by this guy and this was made by this guy. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I came up, we were partisans of Gil Kane, Carmine Infantino, Alex Toth, and Joe Kubert. Those were the 4 guys. Nobody had any years. I mean, I'd outgrown Batman and Superman because it was the Weisinger years on that stuff, and it was just shit. But Batman, I really dug. I didn't like the stories, but I loved the look at it because it was so fucking degenerate looking. And in my adult, I mean, I realized that in my head, Batman is still drawn by Dick Sprang, you know, that planar jaw, and Bruce Wayne with his widow's peak. When I did that 2-issue Batman with Batman and Catwoman, actively tried to do a Bruce Wayne who was a reasonably realistic version of Dick Springs. And Superman is drawn by Jack Burnley and Wayne Boring. And I stopped reading the FF when Jack left. I stopped reading Spider-Man when Steve left. Because they were so completely associated with the material that anyone else was a false front.
I understand.
So that's me.
All right. Speaking of Marvel, you actually created one of their independent Man of Fortune characters, Dominic Fortune.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for that particular character?
Well, I had been doing the same character across the street at Atlas Comics called Scorpion.
Okay.
And I'd been run out of town of that company. The company existed primarily to try to suck some weight out of Marvel. And ultimately, all it really did, and successfully, was raise everybody's rates by about 25 to 50%. Seriously.
Right, because it's a bidding war for talent.
Well, yeah. I mean, we manipulated the game like a stock ticker.
Okay.
And after one particularly upsetting episode at Atlas, and they were literally Marvel was on Madison, just north of 57th Street at that point, and Atlas was on 57th Street, just east of 5th. So it was like a block and a half. And I walked around to Marvel. I said, "How would you guys like to do the Scorpion over here under a different name?" And they did. And Len was another guy who got away with murder because I did all the writing and he wrote the text. So that worked out. Is he here? Did he show up this week?
No, he was sick just before the convention, couldn't make it.
He had a cold.
Something of that nature. I didn't ask about the details.
Okay.
But hopefully he's doing better.
I don't care.
Were there any stories you think were untold before you moved on from the Fortune book?
No, not really. I mean, the Dominic Fortune character was an opportunity for me to do a 1930s pulp character who wasn't shrouded in the kind of bullshit mystery. The comic book enthusiasts always assume because of the work I've done that I was a big pulp reader, and I've barely been able to get through any of the Shadow books. I know this pisses off all the Shadow enthusiasts. The Doc Savage stuff is unreadable. The only pulp stuff I read with any real commitment, and it's a huge part of my life, is the Edgar Rice Burroughs and the Robert E. Howard stuff. I mean, I've always said that the three tentpoles of my career are drawing Nazi planes, bombing my Hebrew school homework, playing with toy soldiers, and reading A Fighting Man of Mars the day before his bar mitzvah. I was 13 years old. I had a flaming fever from hives, which I thought was, which my mother thought was hives. It turned out to be German measles. I infected 30 people in my bar mitzvah. I'd gone to the newsstand. There were no new comics, but they had the Ballantine editions. That first wave of the Ballantine licensed editions of the Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff, and I bought the Martian books #7, A Fighting Man of Mars, of Tanhadron of Hastor, and I sat down on my stoop. It was 4:00 in the afternoon, and it was it was as transformative an experience as my first drug experiences. It really was. I mean, it was like, holy shit, this is what it's all about. This is what it is. And it changed me completely. It gave me, and I say it was that third leg of the career.
Right.
And toy soldiers were a big part of it as well.
Toy soldiers.
Huge part of it.
Okay.
Army men of all kinds. I love that stuff. I still get stuck into eBay to look at this shit. And I realize that it's just I'm 65 looking back at myself at 12, wondering what happened to you, that kind of shit.
The inner child's trying to poke back out.
I have no inner child. I have a debased adult hiding inside. So.
Well, it seems like Dominic Fortune would be a good fit for the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show.
I have a deep suspicion that he's going to show up on the Agent Carter show.
Really?
I do. Well, they move into Los Angeles.
That's true.
I'm just guessing. I mean, I have no knowledge.
Nobody
of
asked
this.
you.
Well, they didn't. Okay. Nobody said, "Hey, we're fucking you over." No. No, but I have a feeling that it would be a logical fit.
Yeah. That would be nice.
Because one of the things about Marvel that I really respect, and this is not a joke, is that they have figured out a way to do what that classic Italian butcher idea of using everything the peel makes, including the squeal.
Okay.
Marvel has found a way to use every single character that's ever passed. I mean, who would have guessed that Groot? I mean, are we all agreed that was a great fucking movie?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I just love that picture. I mean, I'm a big Chris Pratt fan. I mean, I'm a Chris Pratt fan from Parks and Rec.
Okay.
And also from the fact that he's always the best thing in these shitty movies he was doing. That Delivery Man with Vince Vaughn, he was great. And 5-Year Engagement, with him and Alison Brie, he's just great. Did you see him on Billy on the Street?
No.
If you get it, Google, you got to see his appearance of Billy. You watch Billy on the Street? You watch Parks and Rec?
Yes.
You know Billy Eichler?
Okay.
He has a show called Billy on the Street, where he runs around. First of all, he's huge. He's 6 million, and he's incredibly fit and buff, and he's a hostile gay man attacking people on the street with a microphone. It's fantastic.
Okay.
It is the greatest. You've got to see this. And he had Chris Pratt on one night. Unbelievable. It was fantastic. I mean,
you need to sit down with he needs to do a video series all about critiquing TV and movies. Listening to him rant is incredible. Now, you've also worked on the Buck Rogers remake from 2013 in Boom Studios. Mm-hmm. It seemed like
that wasn't from Boom.
That wasn't from Boom?
No, it was from Hermes Press, or as we like to say, Hermes. Okay. Named for its publisher, Dan Herman.
Okay, obviously.
Who always sounds to me like he should be working in a low-rent women's couturier shop. Mr. Herman, Stan Herman of Mr. Mort. You know.
Have you worked on remakes of a few series beyond Buck Rogers?
Well, I did the prequel to Die Hard for Boom, which I wrote for a guy who could not for the life of him draw an attractive woman under any circumstance. I had a wonderful compliment paid to me by one of my colleagues a couple of weeks back where he was looking at some drawings. He said, you look at your stuff, you can always tell what every one of your characters is thinking from the body language of the character. And that is what's important to me. Mm-hmm. I have a real issue with the self-mythologizing and self-dramatizing of talent and material. So when I did these two Die Hard prequels, which both took place in the 70s, and they really involved some experiences of mine, the Blackout and the Bicentennial, both of which were pivotal experiences for me. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like I say, thank you fucking Wikipedia, I can't lie about my age. I was born in 50, and the 70s, the 70s were fantastic because you could fuck anything with hair that wasn't dead, and you were never going to die. And New York was like living in hell with good food. It was a fantastic time. Living, all you motherfuckers who are younger than me, you'll outlive me, but I guarantee I had a better time. Okay. The 70s, being in your 20s in the 70s in New York was staggering.
It sounds
Son of Sam, the Yankees, the Blackout, the Bicentennial. It was fucking amazing. Gerald Ford dropped dead. It was...
I just doubt that's something New York wants to put on its travel bureau. Hell with good
It was
food.
Fantastic. I mean, I'm listening to a novel, this very Dickensian novel that just came out called City on Fire by Garth Hellberg, which he was not born at the time. It takes place between December and it starts 8 months before the Blackout, and the Blackout is the central focus. It's very Dickensian. Every review I've read, every single reviewer is a guy who was my age or close to it, who experienced what the premise, the subject of the novel. And everyone, there's a sniffy, grudging approval of the novel. And the theme that runs through these reviews is that he could have lost 400 pages. It's a 900-page novel.
Ouch.
I'm listening to it on Audible. It's 40 hours long. And it's not bad, but I put it aside for the trip up here because I felt I needed something more of a page-turner for the role, okay? But he's got it. He gets it right. There were things he fucks up. There's some choices of words. I love reading period novels written by people who didn't live in the time and the anachronisms they enact. But the 70s in New York... the greatest. I lived a life that was I dodged a bullet so hard. It was fantastic. You guys, you'll never fucking know. And back to you, young man.
I don't know why I'm here. Is it possible you're
here to ask these fabulous questions?
Is it possible your love of older cinema and sci-fi shows, which is why you get asked to do a lot of these re-adaptations of series like Buck Rogers and movies like that?
Well, I'm not a science fiction fan. I have to say, I was weaned off of science fiction when I got into the comic book business by Archie Goodwin.
Okay.
Archie said, "Stop reading that crap, read this crap." And seriously, he said, "Don't read science fiction, read crime fiction." And that's what happened. I mean, Simonson still reads SF, I think, and fantasy and shit. Makes my head explode. I'm not interested. I read occasional SF, but it always disappoints me. And years ago, some years before he committed suicide, Tom Dish published an essay in The Atlantic about let us accept the fact that science fiction is children's literature and get on with it. Mm-hmm. And it created an enormous firestorm of shit, and people were screaming and yelling. And I kind of agree, because it's. I mean, you look at Star Wars, and Star Wars is about. Nobody ever thinks about fucking in Star Wars. There's such chastity. There's such purity.
Except for that moment where Luke kissed his sister.
With no tongues. And I object. There seems to be no human motivation in this material. And when I did Buck Rogers, I'd never seen the TV series. Not for me, please.
Yeah.
And the strip was just so crude and awful, except for the Russell Keaton. The Russell Keaton stuff.
A little bit.
It's gorgeous. It's beautiful.
A little bit.
It is so beautifully fey and just lovely. It's just rich, beautifully colored. It's gorgeous. And what I want to do is do a Buck Rogers, just literally look. People in the comic book business, people outside of the comic book business, they think comic book is a very liberal form. And they're actually very socially conservative and rather prim and prissy. And I wanted to do a Buck Rogers who was a guy who was radicalized by his experiences in the First World War, which was the experience of a lot of the guys who were supporters of Eugene V. Debs in the 20s.
Right.
And comic book fans don't give a shit about this. They don't. Let's see some guns. Please.
Okay.
But that's what I wanted to do.
That's right.
And I learned a couple of valuable lessons, which is that I no longer even want to think about drawing science fiction anymore. It doesn't interest me in the least.
Wow.
I just don't care about it. It's hard. And years ago, Jeffrey O'Brien, who was a wonderful critic, wrote a book called Hard-Boiled America about the effect of the cover illustrations on what the writers were writing in those original waves of paperback originals. And there's a line in there that struck me right to the bone. It said that crime fiction was just as fantastical as science fiction, but it was based on an observed reality. And that was a transformative idea for me as well. That I no longer was interested in the gleaming cities of fantasy. And bear in mind, I acknowledge that Edgar Rice Burroughs transformed my life. Mm-hmm. Really do. But you can't go home again.
Okay.
And as much as I'm occasionally tempted to think about that, I can't imagine drawing John Carter and Deja Thoris and Woola and all that shit. It's held fondly to my heart, but I can no longer do. You missed all the good shit, by the way. The rest is bullshit. Any more than I can. I go back to movies and television shows that I watched when I was a kid, and I can see the man behind the curtain. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't trust nostalgia.
Okay.
As I've said more than once, nostalgia is good nostalgia, but let's stay away from it. So I'm not that interested. For me, I like drawing, people in interesting clothing, doing interesting things, shooting, killing, and fucking each other. That's sort of my mantra. And again, I'm not a pulp guy. I'm really not. I've done The Shadow and annoyed all these people who love The Shadow so much. But because when I do The Shadow, for example, Lamont Cranston is a veteran of the First World War, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant product of 19th century America. So he's a sexist, a racist, and an elitist. Because that's what guys were like when applying the present sensibilities to period characters is an insult to that one reader who understands the truth. I have an editor who insists that I do period material in order to get away with using racial slurs and ethnic slurs in an effectively realistic context. And she may have a point, okay? Whatever. I like doing that sort of stuff as much as anything else because I like drawing, people in cities, people in cars, people doing stuff that isn't necessarily fantastical. I like that stuff. Eating, smoking, gesturing, having lives.
Well, you seem to be a very artistically and critical person. I'm not going to say cruel because you're just stating opinions. Have you thought about potentially art direction or working in editorial?
Forget about it. I make people cry all the time. Truthfully, honest to God, the reason I moved to California in 1985, two really important reasons. There was a freak storm in the winter of 1984 that wrecked me. It just fucked me up.
Okay.
There was a massive dump of snow in New York City. This guy fell out. He's out. He's gone. He's out.
He's my driver.
Okay. He can sleep now. It's okay.
Yes, he's fine.
But the other thing is, I realized at 35, I moved to California the day before I turned 35, that I had the potential of getting this old, and I needed some way to make a living, some way to build a financial base, because I was profligate with money at that point.
Okay.
And I know comic book fans hate hearing this, but this is also a job. It is a working career. One of the things about comic book fans when they get pissed off at our lack of enthusiasm, for you it's every Wednesday at the comic book shop. It's me. It's every fucking morning on my desk. And I realized that the only thing I could get a job in New York City that would generate, a health plan, insurance, all those fucking grown-up things that you finally wake up in your 30s and say, holy fuck, what did I do? Was to become an editor at the companies. And I to this day I have no idea what they pay editors. But I'd be very difficult to work for. I have standards which I apply to my own work and the work of others. and I expect people to deliver on time, I would never be a successful editor. I would be fired within a year, simply because I am not accommodating.
But
and I'm not a nice person. I mean, I know this. I mean, it's like, it would be nice if I could lie about that. But, you know, for example, when I was working, I was doing some stuff at Wildstorm, and one of the managing editor told the editor I was working with, "Can't we use one of our in-house colorists?" And the editor said, "Do we really want to see Howard make our new colorist cry?" Okay, and he said this literally, you know. You know, I'm a dick. You know, in a lot of ways.
I mean,
but I believe it's in the service of a kind of quality.
Yes. I was going to ask that. I mean, maybe you are kind of a dick. I'm not going to make that distinction here because I don't want to get punched.
Thank you for the qualification, ladies and gentlemen. We can all go on now.
But isn't that kind of the focus of an editor? Is
not in this. Now you see, you're missing it. Okay. One of the reasons that look, the function of an editor, in my experience, is to edit, and what the editorial function has become is one of coddling, one of bringing along.
Okay.
I mean, I think one of the reasons that the alpha position in comics these days is held by the writers, which is utterly ridiculous, is because comics in the 90s were so utterly shitty and just direct-based. They had no narrative sensibility. They had no narrative integrity. They were profoundly cynical and just junk.
Okay.
And the pendulum swings back to this, supported by the fact that, you'll excuse me, present company accepted, of course, the voice of God, ladies and gentlemen, that you've got a readership that continues to be less and less narrative literate and literarily literate. It doesn't bring a great deal of outside experience to the table. It reads books that it's books that it reads outside of comics are books that tend to reflect on the comic books they read. I mean, if I see one more grown man or woman reading Harry Potter or the Twilight series on an airplane, I will reach for my fucking gun. These are books written for children. These are children's books. Okay? They are not appropriate fiction for an adult who votes. Okay?
So if you ever find a news story about Howard Chaykin holding a gun to a man's head,
by the way, that was a metaphor. I don't own weapons. Okay. I've never shot a gun in my life. It's a reference to Mao. For those of you who are subliterate,
it just sounds like a movie moment. That's crap. Read this now.
No, I'm serious. They've created an atmosphere in which the artists are interchangeable, perceived to be interchangeable, and when books are referred to as by the writer, it's as if the fucking book draws itself. And the enthusiasts have to be shut the fuck up. The enthusiasts. Why I oughta. The enthusiasts have to be made to understand in some way or form that comic book artists are not illustrators.
Okay.
We are not illustrators. We are graphic designers in the service of narrative. Okay? In its most perfect form, the function of a guy who draws a comic book is to take the template provided to him by a writer and tell the story in a way that is both beautiful, clear, and narratively sound. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay? I teach at Marvel. I teach a seminar, which this is one half of the seminar I teach. The other is how to have a career for 40 years. And a lot of that is how to be collegial, not friendly. Okay.
Okay.
So, as an editor, I would be unbearable to work for. Talent would not want to work for me because people don't like to be told actual truths about their work. When someone asks you, what do you think? What they really was, how much do you like this?
Okay.
And I don't. I have an assistant who came to work for me some years back, who had clearly been told how wonderful he was for the very longest time. And I said that you were talent-free. You know, you are bereft of skill. You have nothing here for me. You know, I can teach you how to do this, and I will get better work out of you from me than you do for yourself. That's only because I'm yelling at you. And he didn't understand, and he didn't believe me. And he has no eyes. I'm trying to teach him eyes to see shit. And about 2.5, 3 months into the working experience, I'm sitting with him. He's over here. Another guy's over here. I have 2 people in my shop.
Okay.
And we're working, and the radio's going. We're listening to music, and my wife is convinced I play to annoy my assistants. It's Count Basie. Good Count Basie. Serious Count Basie. The Old Testament Count Basie. And all of a sudden, we hear his words, holy shit, this is really fucking hard. And that was it. that defined it for me, because it is fucking hard. And it's particularly fucking hard for people like me, who are not naturally skilled, not naturally gifted, who have had to learn how to do what we do. And I'm lucky enough that I recognized that and was smart enough. Recently, some months back, a colleague of mine died in Palm Springs. And a guy I hadn't seen in many years, but who had been my shadow back in the 70s between marriages. And I realized that I could have had his life. But the reason I didn't have his life was that I made serious conscious choices that were based on self-awareness, that he believed that he was entitled by osmosis to the career that I had. Okay? The career I have was made and built by me. I'm very lucky. I'm deeply blessed. I take nothing for granted. But I am responsible for the good and the bad of my life. I blame no one. And that's no shit.
You definitely worked on your own path into comic books. If somebody was looking for a decent road to begin working...
Never go mine.
Never go yours.
No.
I wasn't going to ask if they should walk your road. I was going to ask what concise advice you give somebody looking to get in.
Well, I think it's a matter of you have to decide up front what you want to be when you grow up. And that's serious. I'm deadly serious. Because Gil Kane was one of my mentors. And Gil was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. And, he had justifiable, not so much felonious, but kind of a larcenous sensibility that came out of being an only child in the Depression. He justified his behavior through that shit all the time. Wow. And I loved him despite all this. I really did. Because he was an incredibly bright guy, rage-filled, and an autodidact, an 8th grade education that was transcendent. And the older I get, the more I become like him, and it's frightening to me. It really is. But he always said, is it popular because it's good, or is it good because it's popular? And we live in a good because it's popular time, okay? Okay. The fact is, there are people working in comics who are enormously successful who I couldn't hire to run my copier, okay? There's one guy in particular, this guy in another universe, he's airbrushing wizards on the sides of vans, it's just, and there are names to be named, but I won't name them here.
Okay.
Comics is like rock and roll, quality doesn't out. It's not a meritocracy. The great rock and roll bands, the great rock and roll performers are not necessarily those that achieve the great fame. That's true of popular music throughout history. You look at jazz in its heyday from 1925 to 1945, and the really good bands never really hit the big time. It was all the white guys doing all the black guy shit. But and comics are like that as well, because comics is a universe. It's a two-way enthusiasm. Until very recently, it was impossible for me to imagine anybody doing comics for whom it had not been a calling from word one. Right. There were not guys in the comic business who came to comics as a second or third choice of a career, which I find fascinating. But most enthusiasts are guys who would do comics if they had the skill or the intent or the hunger to do it. And the fact is, garage bands and grunge bands, which are not very good, achieve enormous success because they reflect the audience's sensibilities. And comics is a marketplace in which reflecting the sensibility of the audience is frequently a real good road to success. This is how I would think. And this isn't even really pandering. It's a shared enthusiasm. Okay? And I don't share a lot of the enthusiasm of my audience. I don't read Harry Potter. I don't give a shit about that stuff. I have strongly held political convictions. I have strongly held social convictions, and my interest. I long ago gave up on the idea that the audience gave a shit about what I was talking about. I accept the existence of a smaller readership in the name of being a cult figure. All I miss is the money. Because I'm a whore. Look, I worked in television specifically so that I could afford to have this lifestyle. I spent 15 years working as a television producer, working on shows I'd never watch, but doing the best work I could for these venues so that I could have a health plan and a pension, medical coverage, real estate, a real life, because I don't want to live an itinerant's life. I don't want to. Years ago, I had an old assistant of mine who was now a very serious player in the CGI business. We would both sit and talk about. Both of us convinced we would end up in a single room occupancy with a blinking red light outside the window and a single bed. And he's looking about buying a second home in Palm Springs right now, so he's okay. So we're both in pretty good shape. I mean, it's one. This is not a path I would recommend to anyone, but I do recommend the idea that you take a hard look at what you want to be when you grow up. That's what I would suggest, and it's a tough question, because if you're going to pander to an audience, I'm frequently called a cynic, and then it's a demonstration of the complete misunderstanding of what cynicism is. Mm-hmm. I'm a skeptic. I'm a romantic realist and a skeptic. If I were cynical, I'd be able to conceal my contempt for your tastes much more effectively.
Okay.
I'm just not that. I'm not that good at it. I wear my shit on my sleeve. I always expect better of people, and I'm always disappointed.
Fair enough. When I was going through your history, one of the major names I came across was American Flagg.
Yes.
I couldn't find a whole lot of compendiums for me to flip through before I was going to talk to you. Could you describe it to me, please?
Yes. Flagg was a book that I was asked to produce for First Comics. It's a post-Holocaust negative utopia as burlesque comedy, and it's deeply inspired by Terry and the Pirates and by Maverick and Gunsmoke. Those are the three source materials, and I wanted to do a book that reflected my interest in fashion, lingerie, and how much I hated the Reagan administration. And that's really what it was. That's what it boiled down to. You guys who are Republicans, who look back on your parents voting for Reagan with fondness, get a fucking clue. This guy wrecked this country. Fuck, man. He brought everything down to a fucking back to you. And it was the first book in which I actually worked really hard to create a point of view and a visual reference system. And to a profound extent, many of the tropes and visual techniques that were created in American Flagg have been absorbed into the vocabulary of the American comic book today with no real attribution. I hate to tell you how many times I've done interviews with young mooks who assume that I borrowed these various tropes and narrative techniques from people who borrowed them from me, because Flagg was done for a smaller venue. Mm-hmm. Am I bitter? Sure, but I'm also still vertical,
Yeah, okay.
So.
Fair enough. Are there any characters out there that you wish you could have had a stint of writing or handling?
No.
I didn't think so.
I don't care. Again, the characters are blank slates. I mean, you have to realize that it's not the character. Look, when I was a little boy, I loved Superman, and then I loved Batman. When I became a Marvel fan, I remember seeing the Stan and Jack stuff, and it was like, oh God, it's like Jesus, only with money and food. It was the greatest. I love this stuff so much. From a fanboy's perspective,
right?
Solely from a fanboy's perspective. In 2005, I was in New York City. I was visiting. My wife and I my kids just moved back to Los Angeles. This is the first year in 30 years I have not been to New York. It's really strange. I'm usually in New York 2 or 3 or 4 times a year. We were flying home just before Christmas, and I had a copy of the novel by a guy named Tom DeHaven. Tom DeHaven? Great.
I do not know him.
DeHaven wrote a trilogy of novels about the newspaper comic strip business called The Funny Pages, Derby Dugan's Depression Days, and Dugan Underground. The first one is really good. The second two, not so much. He wrote a novel called It's Superman in 2005, one of the last books published by Warner Books before they went belly up. If you can imagine if John Dos Passos and John Steinbeck were hired by national periodical publications in 1939 to write a novel taking the Superman mythos and giving it a literary base, that's what this is. And I'm sitting on the plane. I'm with my beautiful wife. And about an hour into the flight, I start weeping. I'm a big crier, so I cry at everything. My wife, generally speaking, sits on this side of me in a theater, and frequently her move is, without even looking at me, is this, handing me a tissue. It's verdad. Last week, for example, I saw Spotlight, Trumbo, Brooklyn, and Bone Tomahawk over a weekend, 2 double features. And I'm weeping like a motherfucker through Brooklyn. It's like, and this book is so wonderful, and it shocks me, stuns me. Bear in mind, I was not surprised that none of you had any idea of this existence. I called Tom. I didn't know the guy.
Okay.
I got a hold of his email address and his phone number from Mike Carlin, who was still the editor at E-Superman back then. And I called him and said, listen, I love this book so much that should the time ever come that it's going to be adapted into any kind of comic book form, I would kill to be the man to do this book. Okay? It is just fabulous. And nobody bought the book. The book sank like a stone. And typically the hardcover copy had a Chris Ware cover because, it's comics, right? It's Chris Ware, of course. And the paperback edition had a still from the Fleischer books, which is much more appropriate. He's also written another book about Superman called Our Hero, Why Superman Matters, which is a series of critical essays about the effect of Superman on our culture. Less interesting, but worth reading. The 3 books that all comic book fans should read: The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon, Men of Tomorrow by Jerry Jones, which is a nonfiction version of Cavalier and Clay, which tells about the organized crime origins of American comic books. There's nothing like reading a book written by an Irish guy who uses so much Yiddish. It's a pisser. and it's Superman by Tom DeHaven. Trust me, you will thank me on all counts. And that's about it. I mean, and that would be fanboy shit going back to my boyhood.
Right.
Okay. But nothing really. I mean, for example, right now I'm working on 2 projects that are so utterly devoid and bereft of anything even vaguely commercial that I must be out of my fucking mind. But then again, who knows?
Well, what projects are you working on? What should we be looking
Well, right
for?
now I'm working on a 12-part series for Dark Horse Presents called Sunshine Patriots, which the logline is very simply two former Rough Riders, one white, one black, who are down in their luck 13 years after the war, find themselves hired by a nascent Hollywood studio to serve as hired guns against the attempted overthrow and overtake of the company by the first wave of Sicilian Mafia Black Hand. So again, it's just so commercial, it's just outrageous. It's a Western that takes place in Los Angeles in 1913. Okay? With airplanes, guns, cars, and heroes that are, in my case, a tribute to Fritz Leiber in a weird sort of way. When I reread the Leiber stuff that I wrote, the adaptations of for Mike Mignola, I was stunned to find out how much of an influence Leiber had been on me as a writer. I wasn't even aware of it at the time. And the relationship and the Favre and Grey Mouser characters in this are people who don't know the material may not know it. People who hear this and say, "Oh fuck yeah!" It's that. One is a union organizer based on Big Bill Haywood, and the other one is a vaudeville performer based on Eubie Blake. And I'm having a good time. The first 2 issues are colored, the first 2 chapters rather. The third chapter will be delivered Thursday or Friday.
Okay.
And at the same time, like an idiot, I'm doing a 5-issue miniseries for Image called Midnight of the Soul, which is something that's been in my book for 20 years, about a spiritually, physically, and emotionally damaged World War II veteran who's never left his home in 5 years after the war in 1950, who in the course of 12 hours has an extended moment of clarity and discovers that everything he's believed about his life up to this point has been a lie. And it's a parody and take on the Joseph Campbell myth of the hero's progress, done in color, which is something I've not done for Image, and it's a tribute to the work of Anthony Mann. I'm a huge Anthony Mann fan. Anthony Mann? Okay. Anthony Mann directed T-Men, Raw Deal, He Walked by Night, Winchester 73, Blood on the Spur. He was the guy who identified what Hitchcock saw in Jimmy Stewart in Rope, one of the pastiche of the Lerner and Loeb murders, Leopold and Loeb murders, and took that damaged goods that Jimmy Stewart was after the Second World War and turned him into this incredibly psychotic cowboy hero. You've never seen these Broken Arrow? These are amazing movies. And Mann was a guy who was able to make the transition from incredibly low-budget black and white pictures into color. He was the first director on Spartacus. And Douglas fired him, okay, and replaced him with Stanley Kubrick. Wow. If you know the picture The Third Man by Carol Reed, the entire sequence in the sewers under Vienna, with Harry Lime being pursued by the police in Vienna, was taken literally lock, stock, and barrel from He Walked by Night. He Walked by Night is the unofficial pilot for Dragnet. Jack Webb plays a forensic scientist in the picture and is smart enough to see that there's something going on here. It's a picture that's the LA equivalent of Naked City. Mann was a giant. And his cinematographer was a guy named John Alton, who published a wonderful book called Painting with Light. Okay? So that's what I'm working on right now. So yes, I'm awash in commerciality. I'm just throwing myself. I'm whoring the fuck out of my career here. It's fantastic.
All right, we got a few minutes left. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Chaykin?
Pussies.
I killed that quick.
No, they don't all rush to say, "Oh, I hate you so much," or "Gee, when are you going to do Sparman?" You know, whatever. Okay. What do you got?
All right,
Somebody.
Last question I got is: you are an extremely well-read individual.
I try, only by comparison to comic book talent.
Well, you definitely love entertainment. So, can you give me a movie recommendation for this year? Because I've been working like almost 24/7 the last few
What if I
weeks.
loved a lot this year?
Yes.
Okay, I loved Grandma, a movie nobody saw. Which looks like a chick picture, but it's really good. And Sam Elliott has a scene in this movie that will break you up. It's phenomenal. It's amazing. Lily Tomlin and Sam Elliott with one scene. It's really good. I also love Bone Tomahawk, which is an incredibly low-budget Western that just gutted me like a fish. It was fantastic. I liked Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. I really dug Spotlight. I've got Legend waiting for me on top of my TV when I get home. The new Tom Hardy picture.
I've been curious.
Replace the Craze. Yeah. I want to see that a lot. I mean, for me, it's more about TV. You know, right now I'm looking forward to Banshee's last season, which is the best action show on TV.
That's the last season for that show?
Yeah, they're closing it up. You know, and Banshee?
Yeah, I've kept up on that show.
Now, would you agree with me that Banshee is like a Jason Aaron comic book on TV?
Absolutely.
Right?
It amazes me that nobody actually wins in the show. Well, everybody struggles and loses.
Alan Sepinwall did this thing where he did a run-up on Daredevil. He said, but does it have this? And he showed this this wonderful sequence in it from season 3, episode 5, where Kai's assistant and the sister of the chief of the casino.
Was incredible.
And that fight scene. It's 5 minutes inside, under, on top of, and around an automobile. Yeah, and it just absolutely it is one of the best shot action shows I've ever seen in my life.
It is really incredible. It amazed me on two different fronts. One, I never thought to use a Rolls Royce's hood ornament in that format. That was really scary. And two, that was one of those scenes that TV usually waits for the end of a season. You know, this is what they're building for. The two lieutenants, the bad guys getting fighted out.
If you're not watching Banshee, you're missing the best comic book show on TV.
Right in the middle of the season is one of the most brutal fight scenes I've ever seen in my life.
And it's a show in which has no problem killing characters. You have no idea how it's going to end, who's going to live. It's just it's great. Love this show. Yeah. So and Peaky Blinders. Love that. I'm digging Man in the High Castle. Disappointed by Edge.
I don't think I saw that.
They just dropped the pilot on Amazon last week. A pedigree I knew I was going to love, and it was incredibly disappointing. Max Martini. I love Max Martini. Mm-hmm. He was the guy who played the Australian dad in the father and son team in Pacific Rim.
Yes.
Pacific Rim? That you saw. No? Nobody saw Pacific? You didn't see Pacific Rim?
How did I get out more than all of you? What the hell?
Pacific Rim is a total pisser. It's Gigantor versus Godzilla. What more can you ask in life, man? This guy's sleeping behind the shades. I love that. I love that.
All right, well, thank you very much for your time. It's been
Thanks, Jeremy. Pleasure. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Next panel is going to be a debut of a new independent series.